The stars looked different from the bridge of the UES Liberty as Captain Jake Morrison watched the main screen show distant galaxies spinning in the black void. His ship had been traveling for 3 months now, farther from Earth than any human vessel had ever gone before. The Liberty carried 127 souls on board, all volunteers who wanted to see what lay beyond the edges of human space. They were explorers, scientists, engineers, and soldiers, but mostly they were dreamers who believed that humanity belonged among the stars. Morrison stood near the captain's chair, a tall man with graying hair and steady eyes that had seen many worlds. He had been in space for 20 years, but this mission felt different. They were not just mapping new systems or looking for resources. They were announcing to the universe that humans had arrived. Chief Science Officer Dr. Lisa Carter worked at her station nearby, her fingers moving quickly across the control panels as she studied readings from the ship's long-range sensors. "Captain, I'm getting some strange energy readings from the 4th planet in this system," Carter said without looking up from her screens. "The signatures don't match anything natural. It looks like some kind of artificial structure." Morrison moved closer to her station. The Liberty was currently in the Kepler 442 system, a place that human telescopes had identified as possibly habitable decades ago. Now that they were here, they found it was more interesting than they had hoped. The 4th planet was a gas giant, with several moons, but something else was orbiting it, something that was definitely not natural. "How big is it?" Morrison asked. Carter made some adjustments to her instruments. "Very big, Captain. Maybe 3 times the size of our ship. It's putting out energy readings that suggest advanced technology. Much more advanced than ours, Chief." Engineer Pete Rodriguez looked up from his own console. He was Morrison's oldest friend, a man who could fix anything and had kept the Liberty running through countless problems during their long journey. "Captain, if there's someone else out here, shouldn't we try to make contact? This could be the first time humans meet another intelligent species." Morrison nodded slowly. The possibility of first contact had always been part of their mission, but now that it was happening, he felt both excited and nervous. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries, but they had no idea what they would find when it finally came. "Amy, open a communications channel. Let's see if we can talk to them." Communications Officer Amy Walsh began working at her station, trying to establish contact with the alien vessel. She was young but skilled, and she had spent years learning how to use the Liberty's advanced communication systems. "I'm sending out standard greeting protocols on multiple frequencies, Captain. Mathematical sequences, prime numbers, and basic pictographs." For several minutes, nothing happened. The Liberty continued to drift through space while its crew waited to see if they would get an answer. Morrison found himself thinking about Earth, about the billions of people who would want to know about this moment. Then the communication panel lit up with incoming signals. "Captain, I'm receiving a response," Walsh said, her voice tight with excitement. "It's complex, but the translation matrix is picking up patterns. They're trying to communicate." The main screen flickered and then showed an image that made everyone on the bridge freeze. The alien that appeared was tall and covered in dark scales, with burning red eyes and a face that looked like it belonged on a predator from humanity's worst nightmares. When it spoke, its voice came through the ship's speakers, like the sound of grinding metal. "Primitive vessel, you will surrender immediately. Your species will submit to the Vorthak Empire or be destroyed. Resistance is futile." Morrison felt his stomach drop. This was not the peaceful first contact that humanity had dreamed about. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Liberty. We come in peace and wish to establish friendly relations with your people." The alien on the screen made a sound that might have been laughter, but it was cold and cruel. "Peace is for the weak. I am Commander Zethkar of the Imperial Warship Dominator's Fist. Your pathetic ship and inferior species will bow before Vorthak might. You have 10 seconds to lower your shields and prepare for boarding, or we will destroy you." Rodriguez moved quickly to his controls. "Captain, their ship is powering up weapons. These are energy readings I've never seen before. Whatever they're planning to hit us with, our shields won't stop it." Morrison's mind raced through options, but he knew they had few choices. The Liberty was an exploration ship, not a warship. It had basic defensive systems and some weapons for dealing with asteroids or hostile wildlife, but nothing that could fight a military vessel from an advanced alien empire. Amy, send a message to Earth Command. Tell them what we've found here. Pete, get us ready to run. Too late, Captain, Rodriguez said, his voice grim. They're firing. The first plasma bolt from the Dominator's fist struck the Liberty's shields and overloaded them instantly. The second blast tore through the ship's hull near the engine room, killing 12 crew members in seconds and leaving Pete Rodriguez badly wounded. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as atmosphere rushed out through the hull breach and the lights flickered. Morrison grabbed the nearest support beam as the ship shook from more impacts. Emergency power to engines, get us out of here. The Liberty limped away from the alien warship using the nearby asteroid field for cover. Behind them, the Dominator's fist followed slowly, like a hunter that knew its prey was wounded and couldn't escape. Morrison helped carry Rodriguez to the medical bay, while damage control teams tried to seal the hull breaches and restore life support. Dr. Carter found Morrison in the medical bay an hour later. Captain, I've been monitoring their communications. They're not just after us. They have coordinates for Earth and our colonies. If we don't stop them here, they'll follow our trail back to human space. Morrison looked down at Rodriguez, who was unconscious but stable. His friend had burns across half his body from the plasma fire that had swept through engineering. Around them, other injured crew members were being treated by the medical staff. These were good people, explorers and scientists who had volunteered to push the boundaries of human knowledge. They didn't deserve to die because humanity had stumbled into the territory of a hostile alien empire. How many ships do they have? Morrison asked. Long-range sensors show at least 20 vessels in this system alone. All military, all more advanced than anything we have. Captain, we can't fight them. We need to run and warn Earth, Orman shook his head. If we run, they'll just follow us home. We came out here to explore and discover new things. Well, we've discovered that there are monsters in the dark between the stars. But we're humans, and humans don't run from monsters. We figure out how to fight them. The message from the Liberty reached Earth Command 3 days after the attack, traveling across the vast distances of space through quantum communication relays that connected human colonies. Admiral Kate Sullivan read the report in her office, overlooking the orbital shipyards above Earth, where hundreds of vessels moved like glowing insects against the backdrop of humanity's homeworld. The report was brief but terrifying. Humanity had made first contact with a hostile alien empire that possessed superior technology and intended to destroy or enslave every human in the galaxy. Sullivan was a career military officer who had spent 30 years preparing for threats that might face humanity as it expanded into space. She had planned for asteroid impacts, solar flares, colony rebellions, and resource wars between different human factions. She had never seriously planned for this. Within an hour of receiving Morrison's message, she had activated the Sol Defense Force's highest alert status and begun calling in every available warship from across human space. The response was impressive by human standards, but looked pathetic when compared to what they faced. Humanity had 63 military vessels of various sizes, spread across 12 star systems. Most were patrol boats and frigates designed for police work and asteroid mining protection. Only 12 were actual warships built for combat. And even those were designed to fight other human vessels, not alien technology that could punch through their shields like paper. Chief Tactical Officer Ryan Brooks stood in the war room aboard the flagship UES Defiant, studying tactical displays that showed everything humanity knew about Vorthak capabilities. The news was not good. Admiral, based on the Liberty's sensor readings, a single Vorthak cruiser has more firepower than our entire fleet. Their shields are stronger, their weapons hit harder, and their ships are faster than ours. Sullivan nodded grimly. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, and right now those eyes were focused on finding a way to keep her species alive. Then we don't fight them the way they expect us to fight. What do we have that they don't? Dr. Emma Foster, the Sol Defense Force's chief weapons researcher, looked up from her portable computer. She was young for such an important position, but she had earned her place by designing some of humanity's most advanced military technology. Admiral, we have creativity. Their weapons are energy-based, designed to overload shields and then burn through armor. But our kinetic weapons might work differently against their defenses. Brooks frowned. Our kinetic weapons are primitive compared to their plasma cannons. We're talking about magnetic railguns and nuclear missiles against weapons that can crack a planet. Foster smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. Primitive doesn't mean useless. A rock thrown hard enough can break anything. I've been running simulations, and I think we can modify our railguns to fire tungsten rods at near light speed. They'll go right through energy shields because shields are designed to stop energy, not physical matter moving at relativistic velocities. On the other side of human space, Marine Colonel Danny Wright was preparing his own response to the alien threat. Wright commanded the 15th Marine Battalion, 3,000 of humanity's best soldiers who specialized in boarding actions and close combat in space. His men and women were tough, experienced fighters who had trained for every possible combat scenario. They had never trained to fight aliens, but Wright figured that fighting was fighting, no matter who you were shooting at. Listen up, Marines. Wright addressed his battalion commanders in the briefing room of the military station Olympus. We've got reports that these Vorthak things are bigger and stronger than humans, with better armor and weapons. That might scare some people, but it doesn't scare us. You know why? Because being big and strong doesn't matter if you can't think fast and adapt to changing situations. Captain Helen Ross, Wright's senior company commander, studied the tactical reports from the Liberty. Sir, their boarding parties use energy weapons and powered armor. Standard tactics would be to meet them head-on with our best equipment, but standard tactics assume we're fighting enemies with similar capabilities. Wright nodded. Exactly. So we don't use standard tactics. We use human tactics. We're smaller, faster, and more flexible than they are. We know how to fight dirty, how to use the environment against our enemies, and how to do unexpected things that mess up their plans. They want a stand-up fight? We'll give them a running gunfight through their own ship's corridors. Back on Earth, the news of alien contact spread quickly despite government attempts to control the information. Within days, every human colony knew that hostile aliens threatened their existence. The reaction was not panic, as many officials had feared. Instead, it was anger. Humans had worked for centuries to spread across the stars, building colonies on harsh worlds and establishing trade routes between distant systems. They were not about to let some alien empire take it all away. Recruitment centers across human space found themselves flooded with volunteers. Men and women who had never considered military service suddenly wanted to join the fight. Civilian shipping companies offered their vessels for military conversion. Mining operations began producing materials for weapons and armor at unprecedented rates. Humanity was mobilizing for total war. The first real test came when Commander Zethkar decided to make an example of the human colony on Titan Station. The Vorthak commander sent 3 warships to destroy the civilian outpost, expecting easy victory against a target with no military defenses. What he found instead was a coordinated ambush planned by Admiral Sullivan and executed by Captain Morgan Clark of the UES Vengeance. Clark had positioned his ship and 2 others inside the ring system of the gas giant that Titan Station orbited, using the ice and rock debris as cover. When the Vorthak ships arrived and began their attack on the station, they found themselves surrounded by hidden human vessels that opened fire simultaneously. The battle lasted only minutes, but it proved several important points. First, Vorthak shields could indeed be penetrated by kinetic weapons moving at high velocity. Second, Vorthak tactical doctrine relied on overwhelming firepower applied against single targets. When faced with multiple attackers coming from different directions, they had trouble coordinating their response. Third, and most importantly, humans could win. One Vorthak cruiser was destroyed completely when a tungsten rod from Clark's railgun punched through its shields and detonated its main reactor. The other 2 ships were badly damaged before they retreated, broadcasting angry threats in their harsh language. Titan Station survived with minimal casualties, and humanity had its first victory against the alien invaders. Dr. Carter, still aboard, the crippled Liberty, monitored Vorthak communications and made a disturbing discovery. The aliens were not just random raiders or pirates. They were an organized military force that had conquered 14 other star systems, using the same tactics they were now employing against humanity. They would arrive in overwhelming force, destroy any resistance, and then demand surrender. Species that submitted became slaves. Species that resisted were exterminated. "Captain Morrison," Carter reported, "they're calling for reinforcements. Zethkar is telling his superiors that humans are more dangerous than expected. They're sending a full battle fleet to finish us off." Morrison, still recovering from his injuries, looked out at the asteroid field where his ship was hidden. The Liberty's crew had been working around the clock to repair the damage from their first encounter with the Vorthak. They had managed to restore most of their systems, but they were still no match for alien warships in direct combat. "How long do we have?" Morrison asked. "Based on their communications, maybe 2 weeks before the main fleet arrives. That's 100 warships." "Captain, even with all of humanity's military forces combined, we don't have enough firepower to stop them." Morrison smiled grimly. "Then we'll have to make sure we don't face them in a fair fight. Humans have been fighting superior enemies since we lived, in caves and through rocks at saber-toothed tigers. We didn't survive by being the strongest or the fastest. We survived by being the smartest and the most stubborn species on our planet." Throughout human space, preparations for the coming battle continued. Civilians evacuated from exposed colonies while military engineers turned asteroids into hidden weapons platforms. Volunteers trained for boarding actions, while scientists worked to reverse engineer captured Vorthak technology. Children as young as 16 lied about their ages to join the military, determined to defend the species that had given them life among the stars. Admiral Sullivan knew that humanity was about to face its greatest test. In 2 weeks, they would either prove that humans belonged in the galaxy, or they would become extinct. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no compromise. The Vorthak had made that clear from the beginning, but humans had something the Vorthak didn't understand. They had the determination that came from knowing they were fighting not just for themselves, but for every future generation of their species. They were fighting for the right to exist in a universe that seemed determined to crush them. And humans, Sullivan knew, were very good at fighting for things that mattered. 3 months had passed since the Liberty first encountered Commander Zethkar and his warships, and the war between humans and the Vorthak Empire had spread across a dozen star systems. Both sides had learned painful lessons about their enemies, but the Vorthak were discovering something that worried them. These humans did not fight like any species they had conquered before. Other races had surrendered after losing a few battles or seeing their homeworlds threatened. Humans seemed to get more dangerous the longer the war continued. General Alex Stone stood on the observation deck of Haven 7's main defense bunker, looking out at the colony that had become his responsibility to defend. Haven 7 was home to 50,000 human colonists who had spent 10 years turning a harsh desert world into a thriving agricultural center. The colony's wheat fields and livestock ranches fed 3 other human worlds, making it a valuable target for Vorthak conquest. Stone knew that if the aliens captured Haven 7, they would use it as a base for attacks deeper into human territory. Stone was a career soldier who had fought in the colony wars 20 years earlier, when different human factions had battled each other for control of resource-rich worlds. Those conflicts had been brutal but civilized compared to what he now faced. The Vorthak did not take prisoners or offer terms of surrender. They conquered worlds completely or destroyed them entirely. There was no middle ground in their philosophy of war. "General, we're detecting Vorthak ships entering the system," reported Lieutenant Beth Parker, Stone's communications officer. Parker was a local girl who had grown up on Haven 7 and knew every canyon and ridge on the planet's surface. She had volunteered for military service when the war began, determined to protect the world that had been her home since childhood. Stone nodded grimly. Intelligence reports from other battles had given him a clear picture of how Vorthak planetary invasions worked. First, they would bombard military installations from orbit using plasma weapons that could melt steel and vaporize concrete. Then they would land ground forces in massive armored transports, expecting any surviving defenders to surrender, rather than face their superior technology and firepower. What the Vorthak did not know was that Haven 7's colonists had spent the last 3 months preparing for this moment. Every building in the main settlement had been connected to underground tunnels that led to hidden supply depots and weapons caches. The colony's mining equipment had been used to carve out defensive positions in the rocky hills surrounding the settlement. Most importantly, every civilian on the planet had been trained in basic combat skills and guerrilla warfare tactics. "Order all units to defensive positions," Stone commanded, "and send word to the civilian militia. It's time to show these aliens what happens when they try to conquer humans on our own territory." The orbital bombardment began exactly as Stone had expected. Vorthak warships positioned themselves above the colony and began firing plasma bolts that turned the surface installations into molten craters. The administrative buildings, power plants, and communication centers disappeared in brilliant flashes of superheated energy. To any observer, it looked like Haven 7 had been completely destroyed in minutes. But the real colony was underground, connected by tunnels that allowed defenders to move unseen between hidden positions. When the Vorthak landing craft descended, through the smoke and ash of the bombardment, they found what appeared to be an empty, lifeless wasteland. Commander Thakmor, leading the ground invasion, felt confident that this would be another easy victory for the Empire. The first Vorthak, soldiers to step onto Haven 7's surface, wore powered armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. They carried plasma rifles that could burn through steel plates and energy shields that deflected most projectiles. By the standards of galactic warfare, they were an unstoppable force that had conquered dozens of worlds. They had never fought humans who refused to play by galactic rules. The attack began when Lieutenant Parker triggered the first series of improvised explosive devices that the colonists had buried throughout the landing zone. The explosions were not powerful enough to destroy Vorthak armor, but they knocked the alien soldiers off their feet and filled the air with smoke and debris that interfered with their sensors. Before the Vorthak could recover, human defenders emerged from hidden positions and began a coordinated assault using tactics that confused and frustrated their enemies. Instead of trying to match alien firepower, the humans used speed and stealth to attack weak points in Vorthak. Equipment. They targeted sensor arrays, communication devices, and the joints between armor plates where repeated impacts could cause system failures. Commander Thakmor found himself fighting an enemy he could not understand. The humans did not form battle lines or attempt to hold territory in any conventional sense. Instead, they appeared from nowhere, struck quickly at vulnerable targets, and disappeared back into their tunnel networks before Vorthak forces could respond effectively. Even worse, the human civilians were indistinguishable from military personnel, making every encounter potentially dangerous. "These creatures fight without honor," Thakmor reported to his superiors aboard the orbiting ships. "They use their young and elderly as soldiers, hide among non-combatants, and attack from ambush rather than meeting us in honest battle. How are we supposed to conquer a species that does not follow proper rules of warfare?" The answer came from General Stone, speaking through the colony's hidden communication system. His message was broadcast on all Vorthak frequencies, ensuring that every alien soldier on the planet would hear it. "This is General Alex Stone of the Haven 7 Defense Force. You have invaded our world and attacked our families. You expected us to surrender because your ships are bigger and your weapons are stronger. But you made a mistake. You forgot that humans don't surrender when we're fighting for our homes." In the weeks that followed, Haven 7 became a nightmare for Vorthak forces. Every building was a potential trap. Every street could hide snipers, and every tunnel might lead to an ambush. The aliens had expected to control the planet within days, but instead found themselves losing soldiers to attacks they could not predict or prevent. Their advanced technology became a liability in the close-quarters urban combat that humans had turned into a deadly art form. Meanwhile, in space above other human worlds, Captain Morgan Clark was pioneering new tactics that took advantage of humanity's growing understanding of Vorthak weaknesses. Clark commanded a small fleet of modified civilian ships that had been converted into military vessels during the early days of the war. His ships were individually weaker than any Vorthak cruiser, but they worked together in ways that alien commanders found difficult to counter. The breakthrough came during the Battle of New Perth, when Clark faced a Vorthak battle group that outnumbered his forces 3-1. Instead of engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, Clark ordered his vessels to attack in coordinated swarms, with multiple small ships focusing on single enemy targets while using their superior maneuverability to avoid return fire. The tactic worked because Vorthak ships had been designed to fight other large vessels in formal fleet engagements. Their weapon systems were optimized for long-range combat against heavily armored opponents, not for tracking multiple small, fast targets attacking from different angles simultaneously. Clark's ships were able to overwhelm Vorthak point defense systems and deliver concentrated fire against critical systems. The key is not to fight them on their terms, Clark explained to other human commanders during a strategy meeting broadcast across the fleet. They want big ships shooting at other big ships from long range. We give them small ships attacking from close range in groups they can't track effectively. They want formal battle lines and organized retreats. We give them chaos and unpredictability. Dr. Lisa Carter, now serving as the Liberty's senior intelligence officer, made the most important discovery of the war when she finally decoded enough Vorthak communications to understand their psychology. The aliens were not just militaristic, by choice but by evolution. Their species had developed on a world where they were the apex predators, with no natural enemies to teach them caution or flexibility. Captain Morrison, Carter reported, I think I understand why they're having so much trouble with us. The Vorthak evolved to be dominant through superior strength and aggression. When they meet resistance, their instinct is to apply more force until the opposition breaks. They've conquered other species by being bigger, stronger, and more ruthless than their enemies. Morrison, his injuries finally healed enough to allow him full duty, studied Carter's analysis with growing hope. But humans didn't evolve that way. We evolved as persistence hunters who wore down our prey through endurance and cooperation. We're used to fighting enemies that are individually stronger than we are. Carter nodded. Exactly. Every species the Vorthak have conquered so far gave up when they realized they couldn't match alien technology and firepower. But humans don't give up. We adapt, we improvise, we find new ways to fight when the old ways don't work. And that's something their psychology can't handle. The truth of Carter's analysis became clear when Commander Zethkar made his greatest mistake. 6 months after the first encounter between humans and the Vorthak Empire, the character of the war had changed completely. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of the orbital fortress above Earth, looking at tactical displays that showed the current state of the conflict across human space. What she saw would have seemed impossible when the war began. Humans were winning. The change had not come quickly or easily. Thousands of human soldiers and civilians had died learning how to fight an enemy with superior technology and overwhelming firepower. But each battle had taught humanity valuable lessons about Vorthak weaknesses, and humans were very good at learning from their mistakes. More importantly, they were excellent at teaching those lessons to others. Admiral, Operation Hammerfall is ready to proceed, reported Colonel Danny Wright, now serving as Sullivan's chief strategic advisor. Wright's Marines had become legends throughout human space for their success in boarding actions against Vorthak warships. What had started as desperate improvisation had evolved into a new form of warfare that took advantage of human adaptability and creativity. Operation Hammerfall was the largest coordinated offensive in human history, involving simultaneous attacks on 3 Vorthak-controlled systems. The plan represented everything humans had learned about fighting their alien enemies. Avoid direct confrontation where possible, exploit enemy weaknesses ruthlessly, and never give the Vorthak time to adapt to changing circumstances. The operation began with intelligence-gathering missions led by Special Forces Major Chris Evans. Evans commanded deep reconnaissance teams that had been operating behind enemy lines for months, living in captured territory and mapping every Vorthak installation, supply depot, and communication relay. His teams had learned to move unseen through alien-controlled space, using captured equipment and forged identification to blend in with conquered populations. The key is understanding how they think, Evans explained during the final briefing for Hammerfall. Vorthak military doctrine is based on overwhelming superiority and centralized command. They put their most important facilities in what they consider the most secure locations. usually orbiting stations protected by multiple layers of defenses, but they assume that anyone who gets past those defenses must be authorized to be there. Evans's teams had identified the critical weakness in Vorthak's strategy. They relied heavily on electronic identification systems and rarely used visual confirmation for access to secure areas. Human infiltrators wearing captured armor and carrying proper identification codes could walk into the most sensitive Vorthak facilities without being questioned. The first target was the Kepler station system, where Commander Zethkar had established his primary command center for operations against human territory. The station was protected by 20 warships and surrounded by defensive platforms that could destroy any attacking fleet long before it came within weapons range. It was considered impregnable by conventional military standards. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding a rebuilt Liberty equipped with experimental stealth technology developed by Dr. Emma Foster, led the assault on Kepler Station. Foster's innovations had created a cloaking system that used captured Vorthak technology combined with human engineering to make the Liberty nearly invisible to enemy sensors. "We're not trying to destroy the station," Morrison explained to his crew as they approached their target. "We're trying to capture it intact. Intelligence believes that Kepler Station contains the communication codes for the entire Vorthak fleet in this sector. If we can get those codes, we can coordinate attacks on their other facilities while they're unable to call for help." The Liberty ghosted through the defensive perimeter around Kepler Station, using routes that Evans's reconnaissance teams had identified as having minimal sensor coverage. Once inside the station's shields, Morrison's crew used captured Vorthak equipment to dock with the main facility. To any observer, they looked like another supply ship making a routine delivery. What happened next demonstrated how much human tactics had evolved since the war began. Instead of trying to fight their way through heavily defended corridors, the assault team used Vorthak identification codes to access maintenance tunnels and service areas that were considered too secure to need heavy guarding. They reached the station's command center without firing a shot. The capture of Kepler Station gave humans their first major intelligence breakthrough of the war. The communication codes they recovered allowed them to monitor Vorthak fleet movements and coordinate attacks with unprecedented precision. More importantly, they learned about internal conflicts within the Vorthak Empire that could be exploited. "The Empire isn't as unified as we thought," Dr. Carter reported after analyzing the captured data. "There are at least 3 different factions, competing for control of the military, and they don't trust each other. Some of their commanders are more concerned with political advancement than military victory." This intelligence proved crucial for the second phase of Hammerfall, which targeted the industrial system of Proxima Forge. The Vorthak had converted this system into a major production center for military equipment, using enslaved populations from conquered worlds to build warships and weapons. Destroying Proxima Forge would cripple Vorthak logistics for the entire war. The attack was led by Captain Morgan Clark, whose swarm tactics had become standard doctrine for human space forces. Clark commanded 50 small ships that had been specially modified for this mission. Each vessel carried a skeleton crew and enough firepower to damage but not destroy major installations. "We're not here to fight their warships," Clark told his captains during the approach to Proxima Forge. "We're here to wreck their ability to build new ones, hit the production facilities, the supply depots, and the orbital elevators. Leave the military targets for last and only if we have time." The attack on Proxima Forge succeeded because it violated every principle of conventional space warfare. Instead of engaging enemy warships in formal battle, Clark's vessels ignored military targets and focused entirely on industrial infrastructure. Vorthak commanders found themselves trying to protect dozens of different facilities simultaneously, while human forces struck at targets they had never considered militarily significant. Within hours, the most important military production center in the sector was in ruins. More importantly, the enslaved workers on Proxima Forge had been liberated by human ground forces led by General Stone's commandos. These freed prisoners provided intelligence about other Vorthak installations and, in many cases, volunteered to join human forces in attacking their former captors. The third target was the most ambitious, the Vorthak fleet base at Rigel Prime. where over 60 enemy warships were stationed for repairs and resupply. This facility was too heavily defended for direct assault, but human intelligence had identified a weakness that could be exploited. Communications specialist Amy Walsh, now serving as Sullivan's chief intelligence officer, had been monitoring Vorthak communications for months and had developed a sophisticated understanding of their command structure. She had discovered that Vorthak military culture placed enormous emphasis on hierarchy and obedience to superior officers. "We can't beat them in a straight fight," Walsh explained to the assault team leaders. "But we can confuse them long enough to get our people inside their defenses. I've been studying their communication protocols, and I think I can convince their commanders that they're receiving new orders from high command." Walsh's plan was audacious even by human standards. Using captured communication equipment and detailed knowledge of Vorthak military procedures, she would impersonate a fleet commander and order the Rigel Prime defenders to redeploy their ships to counter a fictional human attack elsewhere. With the main fleet away from the base, human forces could capture the facility and its supplies. The deception worked perfectly. Vorthak commanders at Rigel Prime received what appeared to be authentic orders from their superiors directing them to move their fleet to defend a more important target. By the time they realized they had been tricked, human Marines were already aboard their base and their ships were too far away to provide immediate support. Major Evans led the assault on Rigel Prime personally, using tactics that had been refined through months of combat experience. His Marines moved through the facility like a controlled explosion, neutralizing resistance points while capturing intact equipment and intelligence materials. The base fell within hours, giving humans their first major Vorthak military facility. But the most significant victory of Operation Hammerfall was not military, but psychological. For the first time since the war began, humans had taken the offensive and won decisive victories against their enemies. The success proved that Vorthak forces could be defeated by opponents who understood their weaknesses and were willing to fight unconventionally. Commander Zethkar, now trapped on a crippled ship after the loss of his command center, broadcast a desperate message to the Vorthak High Command. "These humans are not like other species we have conquered. They do not fight with honor or follow proper military doctrine. They attack our weakest points while avoiding our strengths, and they show no fear of death when protecting their territories." 1 year after Captain Jake Morrison first encountered Commander Zethkar in the Kepler 442 system, the war between humanity and the Vorthak Empire had reached its final phase. Fleet Admiral Korthax arrived at the edge of human space with the largest military force in Vorthak history, 200 warships, 50,000 elite soldiers, and weapons capable of turning entire worlds into lifeless rocks. The alien commander expected to end the war within weeks and add humanity to the long list of species that had fallen before Vorthak might. What Korthax found instead was an enemy that had transformed itself during months of desperate combat. The humans he faced were no longer the naive explorers who had stumbled into his empire's territory. They had become something new, something that the galaxy had never seen before, a species that grew stronger with every battle and more dangerous with every defeat. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiant, watching her fleet take position for what everyone knew would be the final battle of the war. Around her, 300 human vessels moved with the precision that came from months of combat experience. Most were converted civilian ships or hastily built warships that would have seemed pathetic compared to Vorthak technology a year ago. Now they represented something that worried enemy commanders. Proof that humans could adapt to any challenge and find ways to turn their weaknesses into strengths. "Admiral, all fleet elements are in position," reported Captain Morgan Clark, now serving as Sullivan's fleet tactical coordinator. Clark's innovations in swarm tactics had become standard doctrine throughout human space forces, and his success at Proxima Forge had made him a legend among human military personnel. Sullivan nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed both fleets preparing for battle in the Centauri system. She had chosen this location carefully, using intelligence gathered by Major Chris Evans' reconnaissance teams to identify the perfect place for humanity's final stand. The system contained multiple asteroid fields, gas giant atmospheres, and debris clouds that would complicate Vorthak targeting while providing cover for human vessels. Remember, "We're not trying to match them ship for ship," Sullivan broadcast to her fleet commanders. "We're going to use every dirty trick we've learned, every tactical innovation we've developed, and every advantage we can create. They want a formal fleet engagement? We're going to give them chaos." The battle began exactly as Korthax expected, with long-range exchanges of fire between the main battle lines. Vorthak plasma cannons reached out across millions of kilometers to strike human vessels, while human kinetic weapons returned fire with tungsten rods moving at near light speed. For the first few minutes, it looked like a traditional space battle between two organized fleets. Then humanity revealed what it had really learned during a year of warfare. The formal battle lines were a deception. While Korthax focused on the main engagement, smaller human forces had been infiltrating the Vorthak fleet formation using stealth technology developed by Dr. Emma Foster. These infiltration teams, led by Colonel Danny Wright's Marines, had been moving through the debris fields and asteroid clusters for hours before the battle officially began. Wright's Marines struck simultaneously at dozens of Vorthak vessels, using boarding pods that attached to enemy hulls and cut through armor with industrial cutting tools. Once inside, the human soldiers fought with tactics that had been perfected during months of ship-to-ship combat. They avoided direct confrontation with Vorthak security forces, instead targeting life support systems, computer networks, and reactor controls. "The key is not to fight them," Wright explained to his Marines during their final briefing. "The key is to break their ships so they can't fight us, hit the engineering sections, disable their weapons systems, and make them worry about keeping their vessels intact instead of shooting at our fleet." The boarding action succeeded because they exploited fundamental differences in human and Vorthak psychology. Vorthak military doctrine assumed that any enemy who boarded their ships would attempt to capture them through direct combat. Human Marines instead focused on sabotage, using their knowledge of Vorthak technology to cause maximum damage with minimal confrontation. As Vorthak warships began losing power and weapons capability throughout their fleet, Korthax found himself fighting two battles simultaneously: the formal engagement against human warships and an internal struggle against saboteurs who seemed to be everywhere at once. Captain Morrison, commanding the Liberty as part of the main human battle line, watched the enemy fleet begin to lose cohesion as more ships reported critical system failures. "Amy, are you getting those Vorthak communications?" Communications Officer Amy Walsh, now one of the most experienced Vorthak intelligence specialists in human space, monitored enemy transmissions with equipment that had been improved using captured alien technology. "Captain, their fleet coordination is breaking down. Individual ship commanders are requesting permission to withdraw for repairs, but Korthax is ordering them to maintain formation and continue fighting." This intelligence gave Morrison the opening he needed to implement the Wildbray final phase of humanity's battle plan. Using secure communications that the Vorthak could not intercept, he coordinated with other human commanders to execute a maneuver that had been developed specifically for this battle. Every human vessel in the main battle line suddenly accelerated to maximum speed, not toward the enemy fleet but toward the system's largest asteroid field. To Vorthak observers, it looked like the entire human fleet was retreating in panic. Korthax ordered his remaining functional ships to pursue, believing that he was about to achieve the decisive victory he had promised his superiors. The chase led the Vorthak fleet directly into the most sophisticated trap in military history. The asteroid field had been prepared for months by human engineering teams who had installed hidden weapons platforms, communication relays, and supply depots throughout the debris. When the enemy fleet entered the field in pursuit of retreating human vessels, they found themselves surrounded by hostile fire from every direction. Dr. Lisa Carter, monitoring the battle from her station aboard the Liberty, watched her tactical displays show the trap closing around the Vorthak fleet. "Captain, their formation is completely broken. They're taking fire from asteroids they thought were just space debris, and their ships are colliding with obstacles they can't detect in time." The Battle of Centauri lasted for 18 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first few minutes. When Korthax realized he had led his fleet into a carefully prepared killing ground, Vorthak warships, designed for long-range combat in open space, found themselves trapped in a three-dimensional maze where human defenders could attack from any angle while remaining hidden behind cover. What followed was not a battle, but a methodical destruction of the most powerful fleet in Vorthak history. Human forces, fighting from prepared positions with intimate knowledge of the battlefield, picked apart enemy vessels one by one. When Vorthak ships tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by more hidden weapons platforms. When they tried to fight, they discovered that their weapons were ineffective against targets they could not clearly see. Fleet Admiral Korthax, watching his invincible fleet dissolve around him, broadcast a message that was intercepted by human communications. Specialists, impossible. No primitive species should be capable of this level of tactical sophistication. How are they defeating technology that has conquered half the galaxy? The answer came from Admiral Sullivan herself, speaking on an open channel that every surviving Vorthak vessel could receive. Admiral Korthax, this is Admiral Kate Sullivan of the Human Defense Force. You asked how we're defeating your technology. The answer is simple. We're not fighting your technology. We're fighting you. And we've learned that technology is only as good as the people using it. The battle ended when Korthax's flagship, the Pride of Empire, suffered a reactor breach after repeated attacks by human sabotage teams. The explosion could be seen from dozens of light minutes away, marking the end of Vorthak military power in this sector of the galaxy. Of the 200 Vorthak warships that had entered the Centauri system, only 37 survived to escape back to Empire space. Most of those were heavily damaged and would require months of repairs before they could fight again. Human losses were significant but manageable. 42 vessels destroyed and several thousand casualties among fleet personnel. More importantly, the psychological impact of the defeat rippled throughout the Vorthak Empire. For the first time in their history, they had encountered an enemy that not only refused to surrender but had decisively defeated their best military commander using tactics they could not understand or counter. Commander Zethkar, now a prisoner, aboard the Liberty after being captured during the battle, spoke privately with Captain Morrison about the war's outcome. "Your species terrifies us more than any we have encountered," the alien commander admitted. "We understand how to fight stronger enemies, faster enemies, even more advanced enemies, but we cannot comprehend how to fight enemies who refuse to accept defeat." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "That's because you're thinking about this wrong, Commander.